The boy was small for his age, and most people never noticed him as he walked quietly along the streets. His clothes were worn out, his shoes barely held together, and his eyes carried the kind of sadness that most children should never know. He often kept his head down, hoping no one would ask him questions. Life at home was difficult, a place where he felt more fear than comfort. He never knew when harsh words or heavy silence would fill the air, and most days he longed for a little kindness, just a smile or someone who would listen. Each morning, he tried to leave the house early so he could avoid the noise inside. He would wander through the small lanes, sometimes stopping near the old wooden fence at the end of the street. It was there that he first noticed her. She carried 2 heavy containers of milk, her steps slow but steady. She looked like an ordinary woman, someone who worked hard every day and asked for very little in return. She was not rich, not powerful, but there was something in the way she carried herself, something gentle and warm. One day, as she passed by, she saw him sitting on the curb with his knees pulled up to his chest. He tried to avoid her eyes, embarrassed by his untidy look, but she didn't walk past him the way others did. Instead, she stopped, rested her containers on the ground, and asked softly if he was hungry. He didn't answer at first, but she pulled out a small piece of bread she had packed for herself and offered it to him. His fingers shook as he reached for it, his stomach too empty to refuse. She didn't ask questions or push him to speak. She simply sat near him for a few moments, letting him eat without judgment. It was a small act, but for the boy, it felt like the first time in a long while that someone cared. He looked at her carefully, trying to understand why she would help a boy she didn't even know. There was no pity in her eyes, only a simple kindness that felt safe. From that day on, he noticed her more. Every morning when she came down the road with her milk, she would give him a smile or a nod. Sometimes she brought an extra piece of bread, sometimes a little fruit, nothing too big, but always enough to show she remembered him. She asked him once if he was going to school. He lowered his eyes and shook his head, ashamed that he couldn't answer properly. She didn't scold him or press him. Instead, she told him softly that he was smart, that she could see it in his eyes, and that he should never stop dreaming. No matter how hard life felt right now, the boy carried those words with him the whole day. At night, when the house felt too heavy and cold, he would whisper them to himself. It gave him a small light inside, something no one could take away. He began to wait for her, counting the minutes until she appeared again. For him, those few moments each morning were like a lifeline. She didn't stay long, but her presence was enough to remind him that not all people in the world turned away. One morning, he gathered the courage to thank her. He stood as she approached, his voice shaky, and whispered that the bread she gave made his day better. She smiled and placed her hand gently on his shoulder, telling him that even the smallest bit of kindness could change a person's day, and that one day he too might be the one helping someone else. Her words felt like a promise, something he wanted to hold on to forever. Over time, their connection grew stronger. She still carried her milk and lived her simple life, but she always made space in her routine for him. To her, he was just a child who needed a little care, but to him, she became the one person who showed him love without expecting anything back. That bond became his anchor, his safe corner in a world that often felt too heavy for a young boy. He didn't tell her everything about his life, but she didn't need to know. Her kindness was enough. He could see it in her actions, in the way she treated him with dignity, even though he had nothing to give in return. The boy began to believe, slowly, that maybe his future didn't have to look like his past. On some mornings, when the sky was still gray and the streets were quiet, he would watch her walk away, the containers swinging in her hands. In those moments, he made a silent promise to himself. He would never forget her. He would carry her kindness with him, no matter where life took him. He didn't know how or when, but he knew that one day he would come back and show her what her small acts had meant to him. That promise stayed close to his heart, even if she never knew it. For the boy, it was the beginning of hope. The boy grew used to seeing her every morning, almost as if her presence was a part of his daily survival. He would wait at the corner of the road, pretending he had somewhere to be, but in truth, he was only waiting for her smile. Each day she brought something small, sometimes bread, sometimes an apple, sometimes just a kind word. She never made it seem like charity, and that was what touched him the most. She gave as if it was the most natural thing in the world, as if he mattered. For a boy who had always felt invisible, this simple recognition was everything. As the days passed, he found himself opening up in little ways. One morning when she asked how he was doing, he managed to whisper that school felt too far away from his reach. She looked at him thoughtfully and then told him that learning didn't only happen in classrooms. She pointed to the trees swaying above them and said, "The world teaches us every day if we keep our eyes and hearts open." He listened carefully, holding on to each word. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that before. It wasn't long before their talks grew longer. After her work, she would sit on the stone steps near the corner and let him share bits of his world. He didn't tell her everything, his fears, the loneliness at home, but he shared enough to feel lighter. She listened without rushing him, without making him feel small. Sometimes she told him stories from her own life, about how she had to work from a young age, about how she learned to be strong when life didn't give her comfort. The boy would sit wide-eyed, realizing that she too had faced struggles and yet managed to stand tall. Her presence gave him courage. One morning, when she asked if he liked reading, he shook his head sadly. Books were not something he had at home. The next day, she brought him a small, old book, its cover worn but its pages filled with wonder. She handed it to him with a soft smile and said, "Start with this. Words can take you places you've never imagined." He held the book as if it were treasure. That night, by the dim light of the street lamp, he turned the pages slowly, feeling as if he had entered a new world. The boy's world began to change in small, quiet ways. When others ignored him, her kindness reminded him that he was worthy of care. When life felt too heavy, her words lifted him. She didn't give him money or grand promises, but she gave him something more important: hope. He began to walk taller, his eyes less clouded with fear. For the first time in his young life, he believed that maybe he could be more than the boy people overlooked. One evening, after a long day of wandering, he found himself smiling at the memory of her laugh. It was not the kind of laugh that came from wealth or comfort, but a laugh that carried strength. He realized how much he had come to depend on her, not for food or gifts, but for the simple truth that someone cared about him. The thought scared him a little. What if she suddenly stopped coming? But deep down, he trusted her. She wasn't like the others who vanished when things got hard. She was steady, like the rhythm of her footsteps carrying those heavy containers of milk. He began helping her in small ways. If she looked tired, he would walk beside her, carrying one of her lighter bags. She would smile and let him, not making a fuss. Once, when it rained heavily and she struggled to cover her containers, he dashed forward and held his own torn jacket above them both. They ended up laughing under the downpour, soaked to the bone. But in that moment, the boy felt something he hadn't felt in years: joy. She never asked him why he was always alone, never demanded to know the details of his home. She respected his silence and only filled it with encouragement. Each day she reminded him that he was stronger than he realized, that no darkness could last forever if he carried kindness in his heart. Slowly, those words began to build a foundation inside him. They became his shield, protecting him whenever fear tried to take over. One morning, as she handed him a small packet of biscuits, she told him something he never forgot. "Life doesn't measure us by what we own," she said softly, "but by the love we share and the lives we touch. Even if you feel small now, one day you will be the one standing strong for someone else." The boy held those words close, repeating them silently as if they were magic. He knew, in that moment, that this woman had become more than a kind stranger. She was his guardian light, the one who showed him that even broken hearts could be mended with care, though he couldn't say it then. Deep inside, he made another promise. He would carry her lessons with him for the rest of his life. He would not let her kindness be forgotten. And one day, no matter how long it took, he would return to her, not as the frightened boy she found on the curb, but as someone strong enough to honor her. The boy grew into a teenager, and then into a young man, but he never forgot those mornings with her. Life had a way of pulling people apart, and eventually he no longer saw her on the corner with her milk containers. Maybe she had moved to another part of town, maybe her work had changed, or maybe time itself had simply carried her down a different road. At first, he searched for her, wandering through streets and asking quiet questions. But as the days turned into months and the months into years, her presence became a memory he carried in his heart, yet the memory was powerful enough to guide him. Whenever life threw challenges his way, he thought of her words. He remembered how she told him that even when you have little, you can give kindness. Those words pushed him to keep going when he felt like giving up. He began to work harder in school, borrowing books from libraries, taking on small jobs to keep himself afloat. Every step he took felt like proof that her belief in him had not been wasted. As he grew older, the boy turned into a man who carried dignity in the way he walked. He remembered the hunger of his childhood, so he never wasted food. He remembered the loneliness, so he always looked out for others who seemed lost or forgotten. When he saw a child standing alone on the street with tired eyes, he would stop and ask if they needed help. When he saw someone struggling with their load, he would step forward without hesitation. It was as if her spirit had shaped the very person he was becoming. There were nights when he would sit by himself, the city lights glowing in the distance, and wonder where she was. Was she safe? Did she know how much she had changed his life? He wished he could tell her that the frightened boy she had fed on the curb had grown into someone stronger, someone who carried her lessons like treasures. But life kept moving forward, and though he didn't see her, he carried her in his heart every day. He faced struggles as he moved into adulthood. There were times when money was tight, times when doors were closed in his face, times when he felt the weight of the world pressing down. But each time he remembered her voice. Even the smallest kindness can change a day, she had told him. And so, instead of turning bitter, he chose kindness. When someone wronged him, he let go. When life tested him, he stayed patient. Slowly, his persistence built a new path for him. With time, he managed to find steady work. He saved, studied at night, and pushed himself toward a better future. There were days when he felt exhausted, ready to quit, but he would remember how she carried those heavy containers each morning without complaint. If she could keep walking with so little, then surely he could keep going too. Her memory became his silent strength, the reason he never allowed himself to fall into despair. Years passed. He was no longer the fragile boy hiding on a street corner. He was a man with his own place, his own responsibilities, and his own dreams. Yet, the image of her never faded. Sometimes when he helped a stranger or gave food to someone hungry, he would smile quietly to himself, knowing she had planted that seed in him long ago. There were moments when he sat with friends and told them about her, not her name, not her background, but the way she made him feel. He would describe how a simple woman had changed his life with nothing more than bread, a book, and a handful of kind words. His friends would listen, often amazed, and ask if he ever saw her again. He would shake his head with a small sigh, but deep inside he carried a hope that one day he would die as he reached the age of a grown man, successful in his own right. That hope began to grow stronger. The more he achieved, the more he felt a longing to share it with her. It wasn't enough to simply live by her lessons. He wanted to show her what her kindness had built. He wanted her to see that the small boy she once sat beside had become someone who made her proud, though he didn't yet know how or when. He quietly promised himself that he would find her again. No matter how many years had passed, no matter how far he had to go, he would search for the woman who had been his light in the darkest time. For her, he was not just carrying gratitude, he was carrying a lifetime of proof that kindness could change everything. And so, the stage was set. His heart carried not just the memory of a kind woman, but the burning desire to honor her. He didn't know it yet, but the time was coming when his search for her would begin. Years rolled by faster than he ever imagined. The small boy who once waited at the street corner had become a man with a steady career, a modest home, and a sense of pride that came not from wealth, but from the values he carried. Yet deep inside, one promise remained unfinished. He had built a life from the lessons she planted in him, but she didn't know. The woman who had fed him when he was hungry, who had lifted him with words when he was broken, she was somewhere out there, unaware of the difference she had made. One evening, after finishing his work, he sat in silence by his desk. The thought returned stronger than ever. He could not let more years pass without finding her. Gratitude had been growing in his heart for 2 decades, and it was time to share it. He decided he would search for her, no matter how long it took. The next weekend, he went back to the old neighborhood. The streets looked smaller than he remembered, the houses worn down by time. Children played where he once sat in silence, their laughter echoing across the alleyways. He walked slowly, scanning faces, searching for anything familiar. He asked shopkeepers if they remembered a woman who used to carry milk every morning. Some shook their heads, others thought hard before saying she might have moved years ago. Each answer felt like both a step closer and a step further away. Day after day, he returned, speaking to the older people who had lived in the area for decades. One elderly man recalled her faintly. "Yes," the man said, "there was a woman like that. Always kind, always working hard. I think she lived near the edge of town, but I haven't seen her in years." His words gave the man hope. The trail was faint, but it was there. He began visiting nearby villages, asking again and again, piecing together small clues. At times, the search felt endless. People either didn't remember or thought she had moved away long ago. There were moments of doubt when he wondered if he was too late, if she was already gone. But each time doubt crept in, he reminded himself of the boy he once was, the boy who had promised to return. He owed it to her to keep going. One afternoon, after months of searching, he stopped by a small tea shop on the edge of a quiet road. As he sipped his tea, he asked the shopkeeper the same question he had asked so many others. "Do you know a woman who used to deliver milk many years ago?" She was kind, gentle, always smiling. The shopkeeper looked at him thoughtfully and nodded. "I think I know who you mean. She lives not far from here, in a small house with a garden. She's older now, doesn't work like before, but people still remember her kindness." His heart raced. Could it really be her? After so many years, was he finally about to find her? He asked for directions, and with each step toward the place, his emotions swelled. Excitement, nervousness, gratitude, everything mixed together until he could barely breathe. The road grew quieter as he neared a modest little home with faded walls and flowers growing by the fence. His footsteps slowed. He stood outside the gate, his hands trembling. Memories flooded back, the first piece of bread she gave him, the way her words lit up his dark days, the sound of her laughter in the rain. He had imagined this moment for years, but now that it was here, he felt like the same small boy again, unsure and afraid. He held a bouquet of flowers in his hands, not expensive, but chosen with care. He also carried a small wrapped gift, something simple but meaningful. More than anything, he carried the story of his life, the story that she had unknowingly shaped. For a moment, he hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. What if she didn't remember him? What if she had forgotten those mornings that had meant so much to him? But he reminded himself that this wasn't about recognition. It was about gratitude. Whether she remembered or not, he needed to tell her. With a deep breath, he walked up to the door and knocked gently. The sound echoed in the quiet evening air, and his heart seemed to echo with it. Inside, he heard slow footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, and there she was, older, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with years of work and life, but her eyes still carrying that same softness he remembered. For a moment, she looked at him in confusion, as if trying to place the grown man standing at her door. He swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in his throat. "It's me," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The boy who used to wait for you by the street. The one you gave bread to. The one you encouraged." Her eyes widened. She blinked, and then tears began to gather. She placed a hand over her mouth, her voice breaking as she whispered back, "My child." "You came back," and in that instant, 20 years of distance disappeared. He had found her. Her hand trembled as it rested against the doorframe. For a moment, she simply stared at him, unable to believe that the thin little boy she once gave bread to was now standing tall before her, grown into a man. His eyes still carried the same depth she remembered, but now they shone with strength instead of fear. The flowers in his hand, the gentle tone of his voice, it was all too much, and her tears slipped freely down her cheeks. He stepped forward carefully, afraid of overwhelming her, and held out the bouquet. "I've waited 20 years for this day," he said softly. "I promised myself I would come back. I just didn't know how long it would take." His voice cracked as he handed her the flowers. She took them, her fingers brushing his, and the weight of the years between them seemed to dissolve. She invited him inside. Her house was small and simple, with a wooden table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with jars and old books. It was exactly the kind of place he had imagined, humble, but filled with warmth. She poured him a glass of water, her hands still shaking, and sat opposite him. For a long time neither spoke. They simply looked at one another, hearts full, eyes wet. Finally, he broke the silence. "You may not remember everything, but I do. Every word you said, every time you gave me bread, every time you smiled at me, I carried it with me my whole life. When I was afraid, your voice gave me strength. When I was lost, your kindness reminded me to keep going. You saved me." His words came out heavy with emotion, but each one was true. Her tears fell harder. She reached across the table and placed her hand on his. "I only did what any person should do," she whispered. "You were a child who needed care. I never knew what happened to you. I always hoped you were safe." He squeezed her hand gently. "Safe because of you. You didn't just feed me, you gave me hope. And I never forgot. I made it through school, built a life, and every step of the way I thought of you. Today I'm standing here because of what you gave me when you had so little yourself." She shook her head, humbled. "You give me too much credit." "No," he said firmly, his voice strong now. "I don't give you enough. You changed my life forever. And I came back to honor you, to show you that your kindness didn't disappear. It grew. Everything I am is because you believed in me when no one else did." He then placed the small wrapped gift on the table. She opened it slowly, finding inside a framed picture of him with a group of children from the community he now mentored. Smiling faces, bright eyes, it was a reflection of the hope she had once given him. "I work with them now," he explained. "Children who are struggling, children who feel forgotten. I tell them what you told me, that kindness matters, that they are not alone. Your words live on through me, and now through them." The woman's tears flowed freely. She touched the photo as if it were the most precious treasure she had ever held. "I never thought," she whispered, "that such small things could reach this far." He moved from his chair and knelt beside her. It wasn't an act of weakness, but of gratitude, of love. He looked up at her with the same eyes that once looked at her from a street corner. "You were my light," he said, "and I will never stop honoring you. Not today, not ever. Her hands cupped his face, and for the first time in years, she smiled the same smile that had once lifted him from despair. "Then I am proud," she said. "So very proud." They sat together for hours, talking, laughing, crying, filling in the years that had been lost. The boy she once saved was no longer a child, but he had returned to her, not empty-handed. He carried gratitude, love, and a legacy she had unknowingly built. As evening fell and the sky turned golden, he promised her that this reunion was not the end, but a new beginning. He would visit often, he would care for her as she had once cared for him, and he would make sure she never felt alone. And so the circle of kindness was complete. A simple act of compassion had rippled across decades, turning a frightened boy into a man filled with purpose. She had changed his life forever, and now 20 years later, he had come back with gratitude, keeping the promise he once whispered under a gray morning sky.